So we're going to continue by setting up the classes that we created in the previous episode. So I'm going to open up my interface folder first and open up my item actor interface. And I'll select add to add a new function.
And I will call this, let's call it get interaction widget component. Okay, and this is going to take an output of type widget component.
Object reference. And I'm going to rename the output to be return value. I can now compile and save this class and close it. Next, we have, we already set up the input action. We can add this to our input mapping context later. Let's open up our enum in our enum folder here. And this little motion that you see I'm doing here is just docking my window to the main window. And to avoid having to do this repeatedly, I can head up to Edit, Editor Preferences, and I'll change my Asset Editor Open Location to be my main window. Great. Now let's add 3 entries to our enum. The first one, I'll call this none, because it's always good to have a null value when creating enumerations. The second entry will be press, and the third will be hold. So let's enter that now. So this is when we want the interaction type to be a press interaction, and when we want it to be a hold interaction. We can specify how long you need to hold the key down, etc. at a later time. So let's close this, save. Let's see. Let's set up our material for our circle. The first thing I want to do here is make sure that this is set up to work in the widget space, UI. So I'm going to select the output node, head over to my details panel to the left, and I'll change my material domain to be user interface. Next, I'll change my blend mode from opaque to translucent. Now we have access to the final color and the opacity. For the final color, it's rather simple. We're going to simply use a constant and give it a value of 1. Now to create a constant, we can just hold the 1 key on our keyboard and left click. And we can just drag this into the final color. And if I give this a value of 1, you should see a white preview. Great. Now, we are trying to create a circle that we can modify and also give a somewhat pulsing effect so that it animates and blinks when an item is nearby. And we'll need to start this off by creating a circle and then doing the functionality for the time-based pulsing. And we can connect that to our opacity at the end. So to start things off, we can create a few scalar parameters. At this create a scalar parameter, all you need to do is hold left on your, hold S, on your keyboard and left click. I'll rename this to be border roughness. I'll then duplicate this and rename the second one to be softness. I'll then duplicate it one more time. And this one will be our thickness. Great. So what would our default values be? For our thickness, I'm going to give a default value of 0.1. And the maximum slider value for this thickness scalar parameter should be 0.5. This will give us a complete solid circle. Now for softness, I'm going to give it a default value of 60 or maybe 50. Yeah, 50 is fine. And a maximum value of 100. For the border roughness, I'm going to give it a default value of 0.5. And I'm not going to set anything for my maximum value. Now, we need a function called radial gradients. What was it called? Yeah, radial gradient exponential. I'm going to duplicate this function again. And we're going to use this to draw our circle. Now, for our softness, we're just going to simply connect this to our density to the first and second radial gradient exponential nodes. For the water roughness, this will be our radius, and I will then subtract the thickness from the value that we have above here. So I'm just going to bring this down. I'll then search for subtract, and I'll connect this water roughness to input A and the thickness into input B. I'll then connect the return value to radius. Great. We're halfway there. Next, I'll just bring this to the left a bit. Let's bring this in. Right. I'll then duplicate this subtract node, and I'll connect this to input A and this one to input B. Now, if I pass this to the opacity, you can see we already have a circle. Now, all we need to add is the pulsing effect for our animated indicator. So I believe there's a node called time. Yeah, time. And I'll check period to be true, and I'll give it a value of 1. So that means that every 1 second, it will fade in and fade back out. Now let's just create a scalar parameter so that we can modify this at runtime in different material instances. So I'll hold S, and I'll call this fade speed, and I'll give it a default value of 1 as well. I'll then hold M on my keyboard to create a multiply node, and I'll connect the time node into input A and the fade speed into input B. Next, I'll drag off and I'll search for a sine node. And lastly, well, not lastly, but I'll add a add node. You can hold A on your keyboard and left click to create that. I'll leave the input B as 1, and I'll just give myself a little bit of room here. And lastly, finally, I'll add a multiply node. Connect this to input A, and for input B, I'll give it a value of 0.5. Now, all we need to do is tie these two together and give ourselves the option to turn it on or take it off, meaning the pulsing animated effect. So what I'm going to do is bring this down, and I'll search for a switch. Is it switch? I believe it's static bool. Yeah. Is it switch parameter? Yeah. So it's a switch parameter, right? And I'll call this enable time, and I'll connect this to my opacity. And don't worry about this error. This is simply because we don't have anything plugged in to our true and false inputs. I'll then get a multiply node again. Again, hold M and left click, and I'll connect this to my true input. And for the entry A, I'll connect this to my subtract node from my radial gradient exponential nodes. Then I'll drag from this subtract again, and I'll connect this to false. So if enable time is false, then just utilize the circle, but if it's true, utilize the time-based functionality beneath here. Lastly, I'll connect the multiply node to input B of this multiply node, and we can test this by setting the default value to be true. And you can see it's animating in and out every 1 second. I can set this to be false, hit apply, and save, and we're done with this material. Now, we can double click on this material instance, and we can modify the parameters for different instances. I believe we have everything set up. Yeah. So we can enable the time, set as be true. It's pulsing. We can uncheck that. You can see that the fade speed is only available when enable time is true. And we can set this to be 2. It'll be a lot faster, a 3. Or we can do 0.5 if you want it a bit slower. but I'll leave it at 1. Next is the thickness. So I'll set this, it's a slider, so we can drag it, get how thick we want or how thin. And a maximum value of 0.5 is a solid white circle. Next, we can modify the softness. So if you want it really rough on edges or really soft. So like a value of 5 or 4, you can see it's a lot softer. And you can use this for multiple things, like a targeting system for your Souls-like games, for example. And then we have the border roughness. This is, well, as you can see, it gives us some weird behavior. So I recommend leaving this at 0.5. I'll just reset all of these values. And since this is for my indicator, I'll enable time and I'll set my softness to be 5. Next, I'll set my thickness to be 0.5 as well. Great. We can now save and close this material instance. Now that takes care of our interface, enum, input action, and material photo. The more complicated and larger functionality is within our widget classes and our components. So I'll save that for the next episode. So the following one, episode 3, we'll take care of the component. And then in episode 4, we'll finally dive into the UI and get everything tied in. That's it, guys. Bye.